So take just another few moments to conclude. Amy, you're in a new space today. Did someone take over your other room?
We've been doing some renovations on the house.
Wow.
And so I'm usually in my bedroom and they're redoing the bathroom up there. So yeah, I had to move.
I'm glad we get to see your piano.
That's one of them. My kids,
Wow.
my kids play enough that we've got two. They like to teach lessons, so they'll teach siblings. So we'll have people come over and take lessons.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool. They must be pretty talented to be able to teach at such a young age. That is amazing.
Yeah, they've worked hard at it.
Wow, very cool. It looks like a beautiful piano.
Thanks. I love hearing it.
That's smart. It's like, okay, kids, you can only choose instruments that are fun to listen to. No, just kidding. But
Well,
what a nice perk.
well, I don't make that nice of music come out of it, so it's good somebody does.
You've got to take their lessons, I guess. Yeah. Um, well, hi guys. Welcome back. Um, would either of you like to share your journal first?
I'm happy to.
Thanks, Amy.
And I'm sorry I'm still eating
Oh,
lunch. It's been crazy.
no, it's okay. It's such a long class, so always feel like the freedom to nourish yourself when you need.
Okay. Um, so I noticed specifically this week, I had an opportunity a couple of times to sit on the ground with other people and then like get back up and do stuff. And they all looked at me like, oh my gosh, you just were down there and sitting there for a long time and got right up. And I'm like, meditation. I am finding my seat. But all of the movement up and down and all of the poses and stuff. And it is fun to find that I'm just more comfortable in a lot more positions. So, and then my kids and my husband were very supportive and they let me practice some of my short flows on them. And so it was good to practice outside and on other people. So anyway, so there you
Wow.
go.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, the getting up and down. It's really interesting in like Asian cultures where they squat a lot and you see like elderly people who are just so strong and nimble. They say that it's not just by virtue of squatting and sitting that they stay flexible, but it's really the fact that they crouch low and then they get back up, and it's those big transitions that are what really help them age gracefully. So it's really cool that you noticed like how big a deal that is to really be able to go from high to low. And I just have to add in, my mom is 73 and she didn't start doing yoga until I was a yoga teacher. So probably 7 or 8 years ago, she started doing yoga with me. So quite late in life, you know. Um, and even in the past 7 to 8 years, you know, being a woman in her late 60s, she has transformed so much that she's like on the floor playing with her grandkids, and like the other grandparents are like, wow, how do you do it? And it's like, it's never too late. It's really amazing that like people of all ages can really benefit at any time. Like you don't have to start at a certain age to like experience what you're experiencing. It's so inspiring. Um, and have fun to share the flows with your family, because really, you know, when the training's over, um, that that is the way that we stay inspired, is by sharing with others, you know, be it your future yoga students, or, you know, friends, family, whoever's kind of excited to play. Maybe the people who commented, like, you just stood right up. It's like, you should come to a yoga class with me and you'll be able to do that too. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm glad you're seeing the results in our short time together.
Yeah.
Hi, Carol.
Hi. Um, that's so cool. I love what you shared, Amy. Because I didn't even write down physical qualities. And I was like, oh, there's so many physical benefits, obviously from the yoga. um, and yeah, but for some reason, this sent me into like a deep dive in the journal. So I'll just read what I wrote. Um, I said it supports me in a lot of ways. I feel that it naturally becomes a focus in my day. I was kind of more referring to, I guess, spiritual practice, like how we're always checking in with the breath. Um, and also in situations, especially with family situations, like I'm always trying to connect to a spiritual place inside of me and interact from there. Um, and so I said, the training has solidified a grounding spiritual root system that my daily practice grows from. And I'm trying to work with my feelings and thought patterns more to burn through karma or surrender and knowing when to do which. Um, and because I'm still kind of learning that and discerning like when, like what is needed, if that makes sense. Because there's so many different aspects to like yoga practice, especially with learning how to become a teacher. And I said I also do not get drawn into tense situations as easily, and I'm in more of a routine outside of the training days, just kind of naturally being drawn to learning more about yoga and these experiences of like other teachers, and stuff like that. So yeah, sorry, I feel like I went off, but that's what I wrote. So
Thanks for sharing, and no need to apologize. And yeah, it's really amazing to that you can recognize how um, your behavior around your family or the way that you deal with tension has transformed, and that you're able um, to like be aware of that while it's happening. You know, I
mm-hmm.
feel like sometimes we start to evolve and then it's like almost in retrospect, we're like, oh, that went better than it used to, which is great. But to really be recognizing, like, oh, I'm connecting to my breath while I talk to this person. Oh, and that allows me to not get drawn into the tension, to like really be able to feel that as it's happening is so exciting, right? I feel like it allows you to really see how life is like a spiritual practice, you know, and everything you do, even if it seems like really mundane, you know, it can be coming from like this more conscious place, and it can like almost serve a higher nourishment if you're like receiving it in that way. So those are kind of like not actually secret teachings, but they're like secret because only you can do it. You know, like only you can discover it when you're doing it in the moment and you feel it happen. It's like no one else can um, tell you what it's like or make it happen for you, you know. So that's really so special and hopefully rewarding. And now is a good time. You know, we do still have 2 weeks and actually three, right? But like two in terms of the time. And it's good to consider like how you might want to continue like bringing a certain structure into your life. You know, Amy, I know you're so busy, like homeschooling and being a mom and taking care of your house and your family. And like, it seems like I'm sure there are lots of other activities that you serve the community. And so maybe almost like picking one of our training days, right, where you've like carved out this space, and maybe it's like, okay, Tuesday, that's going to be my yoga day where I get a little bit of time to, like, maybe you schedule a yoga class in that time slot of when we used to have training together. Or maybe it's more practical to think, okay, I've got 15 minutes every day, where I can meditate or do yoga or just start thinking, because as soon as the training's over, even though there are these spaces you've carved out, they just like dissolve. They just are like this vacuum that instantly attracts so much into them. Um, so while you're really conscious of the benefits that you're receiving from having a regular practice and like this this yogi support, just think about how you might bring that into your life beyond the training, if it's something that you so desire. Any questions or comments about that? Yeah, Carol.
Um, oh, your what you said about just kind of like having those kind of moments in your normal day, it sparked part of my, or the ending of my journal entry that I didn't read, and it was about I started listening to this yoga teacher podcast because I'm like, I don't know if I want to, be also exploring podcasts and things like that, just kind of like in my routine. And I said, exploring my identity as a person in the world outside of my spiritual practice, although they are one and the same, question mark. And it just kind of brought up this question of like, is it all one and the same, or I feel like I separate, like there's me, in these trainings like with the ashram, and then there's real life, which is not this the actual facts, but does this make sense?
I think so, and stop
Okay.
me if this isn't like resonating, but and this is sort of like advanced yogic philosophy, so bear with me. Um, but most views of reality are dualistic, where it's sort of like there's God, and then like everything else is separate, right? It's sort of um, like sometimes we're in this world, and then sometimes we're like trying to like reach towards the sacred or spiritual or whatever you want to call
Holy
it.
place, maybe.
What was that?
Like kind of like there's the holy place and then there's the not holy place.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's different yogic traditions, and some yogic traditions are actually dualistic, where it's like we can strive for this, but we can't ever quite fully achieve this. But in this tradition, which is called Kashmir Shaivism, it's actually that everything is an emanation of like consciousness, of God, of the sacred energy. There's different names for it, but I'm sure there's one that resonates with you. And um, we don't have to see things as separate. It's like we can, as you experienced, how like you could feel your breath while having a conversation with your family. It's not like you can open your heart, you can feel like joy, you can feel connection to like something bigger in all the activities that you do. But it's hard, right? Because it's like it's almost like the manifest world almost wants to like draw you out. And so the work is to be like, like I can still feel like consciousness. I can still feel this divine connection even when I'm doing XYZ or seeing XYZ or, So our work is that, sometimes it's feels like one or the other, especially in the beginning, where it's like, okay, I have my practice, my meditation, or whatever helps you connect to consciousness, and then I have the rest of my day. And it feels like maybe like just patches, and then eventually like those patches get a little bit bigger where it's like, oh, after my practice, I still feel that when I'm eating breakfast, or I still feel that when I'm going for my morning walk or whatever your routine is. But then the rest of the day starts to trickle in and I lose that connection, and then, oh, and then I come back to it. And eventually the goal is that there is no like, I'm there, I'm not there, I'm there, I'm not there. It's just like continual, um, feeling connected. So it's okay if it doesn't feel continuous yet. That's sort of like um, Babaji's state, which is a great goal to have. Um, but you'll notice with dedication and with having that wish of like, I want to feel like things aren't compartmentalized, like I want to feel like I'm able to connect to this higher energy more continuously. It might not feel like, oh, there's ashram Caro and other podcast Caro, but rather there's just like Caro connecting to divine consciousness, doing all these different things. Does that help or make sense?
Very, very helpful. Yeah. So profound, honestly. I really appreciate your answer. I mean, it was just really covered a lot. So thank you. Yeah, just absorbing it.
Yeah, take your time. Um, I think the way that you get there is like by wanting to get there, by like resonating with whatever it is that I said, where you're like, wow, I want that, and feeling that in your heart, like, oh, I want, and let that kind of propel you into bringing more practice into your day or bringing your practice off the cushion into your life, however it. Something that's so special about yoga and meditation is that it is an individual process, and it's unique and creative for each individual. So, as you figure it out for yourself, you're like, only you can do that. Only you can figure out, like, how do I make this real for me? How do I bring it into my day?
Yeah, a word that kept coming to my mind was emergence, like just kind of emerging. And then also that I'd like to have more kind of like I'd like to honor my practice more. Um, and yeah, so just some intention, I guess.
That's great. Yeah, emerging is a really great way to think of it because in the yogic tradition, all beings have this state inside of them. Even like the worst one you can think of, they all have this state inside. And so it is like this process of allowing it to emerge. Like you're not creating it, you're not developing it. It's really there, but it's just covered up. There's just like a lot of layers of things over it. And so it's almost like as you do your practice and you soften and you open and like layers can start to peel away, this natural state emerges, right? But it's already there, and it's like the allowing for it to like come to the forefront is our work.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions and great discussion. We're only a few minutes into class, and we've already talked about non-dualism, which is kind of like the highest goal in the yogic tradition. So I think it's going to be a great day. Um, so speaking of the day, let me just tell you where we're going. You guys are going to spend some time teaching. You've written some of your Shakti flows, right? So just pretty short sequences. Hopefully you had fun writing them and discovering, connections in your body. And so we'll take some time to let you teach, and there's going to be, a twofold thing coming on. First, like you get to teach, which is awesome. And second, we get to see your sequence. Right, so you get more experience, just getting more and more comfortable teaching. But then we can also talk about the sequence and how awesome it was, and the connections that you made. And if Mel said she was coming today, so she may emerge. But depending on that, we might have extra time for you guys to teach. And then the second portion of class is going to talk about how to take what you wrote, how to take these Shakti vinyasas and write a whole yoga class. And the cool thing is it's not a scary, huge leap. It's really the goal of the train or the theme of the training is like, oh, just one more step, right? One more step forward at a time. So that's where we're going, and we'll end with some meditation. Any questions, comments, logistical things before we dive in? Okay. So take a moment to just glance at your Shakti Vinyasas. And let's first have you pick your favorite one. And then if there's time to do more, I might say like, let's pick the one that needs the most work. But let's start strong with the one you're most excited to teach. So take a moment to glance at your notes, and then one of you will teach.
Abaya.
Yeah.
Oh, could I just run to the restroom super quick?
Yeah, sure. And as long as you're going, Amy, if you need to eat lunch or run and do anything really quick, let's just take a little break so you don't actually have to run, Caro.
Okay, thanks. It'll be quick though, it's right there. Yay, we're back.
Um, so, do either of you have a Shakti flow that you're excited to teach that's from the floor? Or actually, Carol, you just look excited, so it can be anyone. I just thought
Okay.
it might be fun to start, but you guys have already been doing lots of yoga, so you're probably warm and ready.
Yeah, mine starts in tables, so we'll start there, I guess.
That's perfect. And I'm going to give you guys the option if when teaching or practicing, listening to music helps you get into the flow. You're welcome to use the Konalani playlist. The first two songs are very, very like ambient, so not distracting, but only if it would help you, not if it would be a distraction in any way. So with that, whenever you're ready, Caro, and I'll have you teach the whole thing on the first side, and then balance it out and teach it again on the second side.
Okay, I think it's. Wait. So I'm teaching the mini flow twice?
Um, Assuming that side one is like a right side, thing, and then you have to do it again on the second
Yeah,
side.
so there's only one that it alternates sides, like one pose, and I put both in the flow.
Okay,
Um,
cool. Then you can just teach it as you wrote it.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So we're going to begin in table. So just having your knees, a decent width apart so that your hips feel comfortable, like they can relax and move easily and smoothly. And we're just going to do some cat-cows here, but in a very mindful and slow manner. So we're just going to begin by drawing the hands towards your knees as you lift the hips and open the chest forwards, shining the heart to the top of your mat, lifting the gaze up. And then pretend like you're separating your mat, pressing the hands forwards as you find space through the shoulders and around the spine, drawing the chin in. Maybe send the hips back a little bit. And moving through this flow with a natural breath and noticing the qualities of the movement, going from opening the chest to rounding the spine. And then we're going to find a neutral position where our spine is comfortably in a normal curved spot. And then we're going to tuck the hips just slightly so that you engage the lower belly. And extend your right fingertips forwards as you reach your back left heel towards the back of the mat. And then you can also flip your right toes for more support. And then we're going to draw your elbow and your knee in towards center and then extend away. And we're going to do this 3 more times on this side. So seeing what lights up as you extend and lengthen, and also what engages as you draw everything into center. And then on the exhale, allowing both your limbs to slowly release back to the mat. And then we'll just kind of find a little rock side to side through the hips. You can pick one hand off the mat and the other to readjust your grip for the opposite side. And see if you can push more through the outer edges of your hands and find space between your ears and your neck and your shoulders. And then we're just going to do the same movement on the other side. So extending your left fingertips forwards, reaching through the back right heel, lengthening, and then drawing the elbow and the knee towards each other and rounding a bit through the spine. Reaching, extending. You can flip your toes under if you need a little bit more support. And then seeing if you can find an even work and effort through the entire length of your body as you move from the extension to the center. Moving through this one more time, reaching and lengthening, and then the next time you draw the elbow and knee in, you can just let them relax and release to the mat. And then we're going to go from here to Bhaktasana, so just walking your knees out a little bit and send your hips back. Then releasing your forehead on the mat, rolling that side to side, and then slowly walk your hands over towards the left. Getting a nice deep side stretch through the right side of your body. Returning to the natural breath. Slowly begin to walk your hands to the opposite side. And relax and release into the side body as you breathe evenly. And then slowly walking the hands back to center, we're going to plant the palms all the way through the forearms and the elbows onto the mat and lift your hips, slowly coming forwards to set up for dolphin pose. So flipping the back toes under, we're going to spread your weight through the outer edges of your hands and then slowly begin to draw the navel towards, or the belly button towards your navel and around the spine. Spreading the shoulders apart and moving through that cat-cow now here to find your strength in dolphin pose through your core. Getting a nice neutral position. You can walk the hands in a little to make a kind of heart shape with your fingers or V, or keep them more out, just finding a place of good strength for where your shoulders feel supported. And then coming to a place where the weight is nice and evenly distributed, begin to lift your knees off the mat and send your hips up towards the sky. And then you can walk the feet out. And then moving in dolphin slightly forwards, shifting the weight as you draw your head forwards and then send your head back and your hips back. And then we're just going to gently drop the knees down and send your hips back as you release the hands off the mat, slowly rolling the spine up one vertebrae at a time to kneeling. And then that's where the sequence, the mini flow stops.
All right, thank you, Caro. Excellent job. So first I'll let Amy jump in if she has anything she would like to share about the sequence or any of the poses.
I appreciated how you led us into dolphin. Like, you started with cues and cat cow that you kind of brought into dolphin, and that, anyway, I appreciated the connection and like easing into it instead of just, here we go.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, great job. I really appreciated your pacing in each pose and each movement. I felt like we really had time to explore, and we had, clear setups, but also ways to start to notice and feel and go a little bit deeper with our awareness. So I thought that was really fun. I loved the sequence. I thought it was really smooth. Right back to the idea of steps. It was like we were always just like one step away from the next thing. So very smooth. It's funny, I had a wish and it was like the very last thing that you did. And so part of me is like, maybe it's just perfect. Every movement was flexion of the hips, which, like people are in flexion a lot, just like sitting and all of those things that we do. And so my hips, at least, I felt like, oh, I really want like just a counter. And then at the end, you had us come up to kneeling. And so maybe even like had you added in like a camel or something as that last pose, maybe that would have been enough. I did feel like I wanted it a little sooner, so perhaps like after, you know, um, after we do tabletop, balancing table, and then we have like our little break, maybe we could roll up from there and do like just something. It doesn't even have to be camel, just something chill. Oh, just an idea. Instead of doing the side bends in Bhaktasana, um, after the balancing table, you could have us roll up and do side bends from kneeling. So a way to get that movement in, but just give our hip flexors a little break. And then from there, we could go back down into dolphin. So I think all the movements you included were great, and maybe it's just because my hips are are so sensitive, but consider just something to give the hips a little relief before we go into a little more flexion. Does that make sense?
It actually does. It's funny when I was teaching it back, I noticed like, oh, this is a lot like bending forwards. So yeah, I think it's also just like a good reminder. I feel like I just need to do my flows more. Like after I write them down, do it and then make those adjustments.
That,
I feel like it's easier, like, because when I share and then you do it for me, but I want to get better at like doing it, on my own. So it makes total sense.
right.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And at this point in the training, it's sort of like this is perfect. Like this is where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then eventually, like just being able to have that feedback in your own body. But also, when you do it yourself, you're probably going faster through the movements just because it takes more time when you're teaching people and having to help them find that awareness. And so maybe at that speed, it was okay to, do that much flexion.
Yeah.
So, it might help to just slow things down a little bit to really imagine like, okay, if I was teaching this, what would the pacing feel like? So maybe that will help. Um, Another thing is like once you have the sequence and you can look at it, you can literally say like, oh, okay, back bend, back bend, back bend, back bend, or like, oh, I had a twist and then I had a forward fold and then I had a back bend, or I had two hip openers and then a forward fold. So give yourself permission. Like we want you to write it from your feeling and your exploring, but then you can almost have like a little test of like, just glancing at what the movements are to check it if it's hard for you to notice that just by feeling. So,
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah.
Appreciate it.
Um, any questions before Amy teaches one of her Shakti flows? Okay. And Amy, it's up to you if your sequence is not symmetrical, you can teach it again on the second side, and then maybe the second side is just a little faster through the symmetrical parts, if that makes sense. And I just want to let you guys know I don't have my notebook, so I'm taking notes on my phone, but I just didn't want it to look like I was like texting or anything like that. So I am focused on you guys.
Okay. Um, so come to kneeling on your mat facing the long edge. And then just shift your hips to the left and sit down in Bharadvajasana. Bring your right arm around and up so that you can feel the back bend or the side bend. And just come in and out of it a couple times and feel your core turning on to make this twist happen. Feel the length from your sit bones to your crown of your head. And then on this next one, just hold the pose for a little bit longer. Okay, and then as you come out of it, let your arm drop and then come up to a T, pulling your bum back on your hips and then back and then up to kneeling. Bring your left foot out to the side with your toes facing the same direction as your knee, and pulse in and out of that bent knee a little bit to feel your hips warm up. You can bring your right arm up over into the side bend and lean into your knee just to feel that stretch through your inner groin and feel your foot connected with the mat at all 3 points. Okay. Let your hand drop and come up to your right hip, lower onto the ground, and bring your right foot in front of you and your left foot straight out. And then with this left foot, draw it back a little bit, bend it so that you can find length in your spine, and then let that length fall over your leg as you press through the ball of your foot. And then pull back, bend your knee and find your length, and press through the ball of your foot. And do it one more time. And this time when we go down, hold it for just a minute to feel your hamstrings open up. Okay. And then let your spine roll up to seated again, to straight up. And then draw your feet around and come to lying on your mat. And bring your arms out to a T and roll your feet, your legs down to one side. Leave your knees connected with the ground and just very slowly bring your arm up and over to meet your right hand. And then let your left hand drop back toward the ground. It doesn't have to go all the way to the ground, just as far as is comfortable. And feel this very slow and diligent movement massage your spine. As you keep moving, if there's a spot that feels good and you need to pulse there, go ahead. And then, okay, and then roll, bring your arms to a T on the ground, roll your knees back up to your chest, grab the outside of your feet and press up through the balls of your feet in happy baby pose. And if it feels good, you can rock back and forth a little bit and massage your spine in a totally different way. And okay, then drop your feet to the mat, roll to your right side and press back up. So this time, oh, we did this side. So bring your feet to your right side so we can do Bharadvajasana on the other side. And plant your right hand down behind you. Use your left hand to stretch up and over to go in and out of the pose a little bit. And you can feel this in your hip socket, bringing warmth and movement to the little muscles there. Continue to find length from your sit bones to your crown of your head. And then on your next one, just hold it back a little bit to feel the side stretch. Bring your hand down and rest it on your knees. Come back to kneeling. And then a standing kneel, and bring your right foot out to the side this time to pulse into it a little bit. And then once that feels good, bring your left arm up and over and feel how that adds to the stretch in your inner thigh. And keep pressing through all 3 points of your foot. Okay. And then when it feels time, just take a rest in the pose for a minute with your arms stretching to the right side of the room. And then bring your hands down to the ground in front of you. Bring your left foot in front and stretch your right foot out to the side. And then we're going to do those little waves with this foot where bend your knee, and find your length. And then let your spine fall over your knee as you straighten out through your foot. Bend your knee and find your length. And press through your foot and let your spine fall forward. And then this last time, bend your knee. Find lots of extra length. And then press through the ball of your foot and rest in the pose, coming as far as is comfortable without straining your lower back. Okay. And then sit back up, roll your spine up, lie on the ground one more time. Draw your knees in and grab the outside of your feet and find happy baby one more time. Oh, wait. Sorry. Bring your knees over to the right side and your arms in a T. And then we'll do that accordion with your left arm this time to open and close. And feel the movement in your spine. Be sure you slow it down and you can really feel your spine. And then on this last one, just pause, open, to feel your heart open. And then draw your knees into your chest and grab the outside of your feet for happy baby. And if it felt good and you'd like to roll from side to side, go ahead and do that again. Alrighty.
Thank you so much, Amy. Great job. Before I share, Carol, any comments you'd like to make about any of the poses or the sequence?
I feel like I'm just like, woo, floating through my body, in my body. I don't know. Very magical sequence. I loved just like the variety of things that we did and how it flowed so smoothly. And I just could tell that like you were very in tune with what felt good because of how I felt in the sequence. And honestly, I don't know if I have anything like I would add. I naturally went into like a back bend for when we did Parigasana, but then we ended up like kind of, having an exploration that brought an opening. So maybe it wasn't even necessary. But yeah, I loved it. Thanks. Just maybe something to try.
Okay, thanks, Carol.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carol, and thanks, Amy. Great job. I don't want to just repeat everything that Carol just said, but I did really love the variety of the movements. I felt like even though it was very smooth, like we just had one step to get to the next movement, it was always like a pretty interesting step where I was like, oh, wow, now we're like in something new. And it just made it really feel like this full body experience because of those like changes of levels and coming to our back, coming, up to kneeling. So I really feel like though it was just like 8.5 minutes, like my whole body feels like really alive. You did a really great job in each individual pose as well, setting it up, and then having a very clear path for us of like how should we explore this, because like Carol said, like in Parigasana there's so many different ways. Like you could emphasize a back bend, you could emphasize you know side bending, and I felt like you really were emphasizing like the hips and the groin stretch and playing with bending the knees. So I felt like so much clarity from you in each pose of like, okay, what's the focus? We had time to explore, and then even like a little pause to really sink in. So I thought your pacing through each pose was really wonderful. We have not talked about this yet. I just see like an opportunity to almost like foreshadow something that we're going to talk about in class planning. So this is not something that was expected of you guys, but I want, while the sequence is fresh, like in our minds and in our bodies, I want to use your sequence, Amy, as an example of how this might start to translate when you're teaching a whole class. Is that okay with you, Amy? Okay.
Mhm.
Um, so I think we can all agree that there was a great variety of movements and it felt really good. And so there's sort of an opportunity to actually repeat the sequence again. And sometimes when that happens, the sequence has to change a little bit to help it be as smooth as possible. And so I just want to show you, I was like, oh, I think we're just right there. So when we're here and we drop the knees to one side, we gently roll up, we're back at the beginning. It might change, you know, the what side you have us start in Bharadvajasana, but then it's like, oh, okay, so we can go back into Bharadvajasana, we can come back up to our kneel, return to Parigasana, um, and then transition down into Jana Shirshasana. And so it's not something that you're necessarily going to do with every Shakti flow, but I just want you guys to see what that would be like if you've got a sequence where you're like, yeah, I would like to repeat that. Like that would feel good. You would get on your mat, you'd play with it, and then it'd almost be like, okay, from the last movement, how would I get back up? So I just saw the opportunity because it really did just flow so nicely into that. And it might change a little. Like maybe you're like, oh, you know, I would really like, oh, that, there was actually another thing. This is just such a good example of how many options you have, right? So that was an example of repeating the whole sequence, but maybe it's a little simpler where it's like, oh, okay, we've got the twist, we've got Parigasana, we transition down into Parvritajana Shirshasana, kind of actually a modification of Jana Shirshasana is how we approached it. And then I was actually feeling in my body, I was like, oh, from here, wow, it could feel really nice to go back. And so it's a little tighter, a little smaller loop where you still have the rest of the sequence, but we only repeat, you know, these movements. It just, the way that you sequenced it was so fluid that I really could feel like the potential here, the benefit of like how these movements feel really good together. So every teacher is going to have a different style, and so I don't want you guys to feel like you have to do that, but I just want to plant those seeds because sequencing's hard. So if you come up with something that really flows, like you did, Amy, give yourself permission to say like, okay, let's explore that. You know, let's do that a few more times. And then maybe after the third one, it's like, okay, and now we'll recline and we'll add in the twists. One other just little seed I'll plant, how amazing that you ended up like so easily being able to come up to the beginning. And this is what I had done on the first side. So when you anticipate that, it's like, okay, we're here. You might say something like, pivot the feet, lie down, and then we'll do the twists and stuff so that when we roll up, we're ready for the second side. Does that make sense? Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And again, none of this was stuff that we asked of you, so I'm just sort of like kind of showing you the next step as you start to figure out how it fits in to a class sequence. How do you feel about that, Amy?
That sounds good. Yeah. It honestly didn't feel like there was too much in between, like it was too big of a jump between each pose?
It, it's funny. I know what you mean, and I think it's great that that was like on your radar. Um, I think that you're right. Like there could be a little more smoothness, but I don't think the sequence has to change. Like I think it's almost like as you repeat it in your body and you find like when I was repeating just those three movements of Barad, to Parigasana, each time I did it, it got a little smoother. Like this transition, I think was a little bit different than how you had done it. So I felt like, wow, this really is an incredible sequence. It does give you, a little more work because to guide your students into finding that ease is more challenging when it's almost like your stairs had like a little bit bigger of steps. So it was like they were still smooth, right? But it was almost like, okay, when it's a bigger step, like you have to lift your leg a little higher, like your body has to work a little harder. So I think it's a personal choice. And if you feel like it's too much to juggle to make that smooth, then sure, maybe, it could be as simple as this, Amy, like, we've got Bharadvajasana. Maybe there's something you want to do from kneeling. Maybe just it's like, oh, okay, let's just reach up from kneeling, take a side bend or something, and then add in the leg. So then that actually feels like a nice, like, intermediary. And then I really liked this sequence right here. I think it could be less smooth for certain bodies, but felt good for me. And then from here back to here just felt so natural from here to here. And then that might make it a little easier to lay down. Maybe you're like, oh, it's easier to lay down from here. Have them, I don't know, I think at this point you'd have to go the other way. So it might be like place the hands behind you, lift the legs. Maybe you add in something here, and then extend the legs back down. And start from the beginning. So, um, does that? I'm like,
That's
did I
helpful.
just
No,
make
that's
it more
super helpful.
complicated? Okay. Um, I think you had really great intuition. That you're like, oh, is that too much? And if you're feeling that way, the answer is usually yes. Like you have great intuition. So then instead of being like, okay, back to the drawing board, it's almost like, okay, how can I just, put a smaller step in between those two big steps? Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Um, so, Carol, will you teach something else? And it's okay if it's not your favorite one. You'll just have the opportunity to hear feedback from me and Amy.
Yeah. I'm trying to think which one I want to teach. Um, Is it okay, Amy, if I teach like a repeat from our warm up? That's okay.
Okay, I'm muted. Go ahead. That'll be great.
Okay, cool. So then we'll begin in a seated onesie. Should I teach the onesie, Abaya?
Um, though I love it and I want you to teach it, it does take a while. So I think for today, you could just take, like a minute, but keep it to more focusing on the other poses so we can learn more about sequencing.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks. So we're gonna begin seated and finding a comfortable place for your sits bones. As you inhale, lengthen through the spine, lifting through the crown of your head towards the sky and relaxing your shoulders down away from your ears. Drawing your awareness inwards so that you're noticing each inhale and exhale. And then we'll begin to move the head in just little tiny side circles, drawing the chin down to one shoulder and then the other, and begin to incorporate your spine, or notice how that movement moves through your spine, and then begin to find just a little shifting in the hips. And then slowly circling all the way down through the hips so that you can really feel the space in each little micro movement. And then just slowly finding center. See if you can lift the heart a little higher after that movement. And on the exhale, just releasing any tension and allowing your left leg to unfurl, opening it up to the side. We're going to prepare for revolved head to knee. So reaching down your left leg with your hand and begin to open up towards the opposite side, feeling a twist in your spine. As you begin to bring your awareness up, you can raise your right hand, reaching through the fingertips and overhead as you open the side body and drape over the front extended leg. Then we're going to turn down towards the ground as we allow that hand to fall, and we're going to drag it towards our body and then away and up overhead. Finding a slow circular motion and noticing where your spine is in relation to the hand as it moves through space. Then draping it all the way over the extended leg and finding a comfortable place to breathe in stillness. And then we're going to reach it overhead, rainbowing the hand back behind you, circling the extended arm up and finding a counter pose as you lift the hips. And then reaching back down, releasing. We're going to just settle into center and switch legs, coming on to the opposite side. Reaching down your extended leg and opening up through the left hand, reaching it above you and overhead, allowing the spine to naturally drape over your extended leg and feeling spaciousness through your entire left side body. Then allowing the arm to relax down to the ground, noticing your shoulders shift forwards, draw the hand back and away. Finding that smooth circling motion and following it with your gaze, noticing what engages through the core to make this movement happen as smoothly as possible. If you find a place that feels extra productive, you can just breathe naturally there, finding stillness if that serves you in your practice. And then we're going to lift through the top hand, reaching overhead above, planting that hand behind us, and then lift through the hips. Slowly releasing them down when you're ready, and then setting the weight back into both hands. We'll put the knees up towards the sky and windshield wiper them so you can massage your lower back, finding space through the hips. Then walking the hands into a shoulder width distance, planting the feet, and then lifting the hips into an upside down table. Using the core to slowly, gently place them back down, and then readjusting to find even effort through your entire body as you continue to explore this pose and movement to get into it. And then slowly walking your spine down to the mat, coming onto your elbows, and then all the way onto your back. Extend the legs out and arms to a T. Okay, and then technically the mini flow stops there, but I started writing from there. I think it's weird how my sequences, like, am I doing something wrong that they always do both sides?
Great question, and let's talk about it. But 1 second, because Satyam's sawing right outside the window, and it is really hard to talk while that's happening. So, great question. There is nothing wrong with doing both sides. Like it's really a personal preference. It does change like the feeling of it, as you probably experienced with Amy's. When it's like a few more poses on one side, it starts to open the door for like more of that flowing repetition, where it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, we might take this pocket and we might play with it a few times. There was an opportunity for that in your class between two poses, like between Parvritajana Shirshasana and flash dance, so because you sequence two poses together, there would be, the opportunity to play between those two shapes a little bit. So if that's what's, naturally coming out of you and that's how you want to teach, there's definitely no like right or wrong. I do think it can be fun to start to think of it as one side and then the next because in terms of steps, like something I've noticed about your two sequences, they kind of hovered um, a lot closer to, like one place. Like this one hovered around table and we did things really only from table. Whereas had you done one-sided poses, you might have felt like, okay, after balancing table, we can allow the leg to come out and we can come and do something else. And oh, after doing that, feels really good to like take this side bend. And you just might feel like you have more room to explore if you're like, okay, after doing this pose, what does my body want? Instead of like, oh, and now we just always go to the second side, which kind of like limits, what you're feeling because it it's almost like the mind being like, okay, swap sides instead of like, what does my body really want to do? So I I would just, like see what happens and give yourself that possibility. But sometimes it feels really good to just do one side and then the other. So it's definitely not right or wrong. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I just kind of want to broaden my horizon a little more to that other mindset when I do my next few, like when I am creating them, because I think it could bring something different, which is cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't think you have to start from scratch, so it might be like,
Yeah.
okay, we're here, we're here, and we're here. And then maybe instead of swapping to the other side right away, maybe you even take what you did where you like want to explore reverse table, and then you switch the cross of the legs and you start over. But one thing I will say is in the assignment, it was 3 to 5 poses on one side. Um, and so what that means is like the sequence ends up being a lot longer,
Uh,
if it's 3 to 5 on one side. So
yeah,
when we get into class planning strategies, it might just be a little different if your sequences aren't as long. You know what I mean?
yeah, that makes total sense.
Okay. Um, so Amy, will you share another one of yours? And it would be awesome if it was something not from the floor, just because we've done a lot of floor ones, but I don't want to limit you if you're really excited about one.
Oh, she's muted.
Okay. Okay, Carol, I'm just going to redo mine too. Well, because I'm realizing this. Okay, face the long edge of your mat, and we're going to start in Parigasana again. I like Parigasana. I end up here a lot. So we're going to start in Parigasana, and we're going to do arm circles. We're going to pull it from the back of the room towards your bent knee, and up and around. Being sure to support yourself with both of your legs to find space in your hips. And feel your spine twisting and giving your heart a chance to open up. Okay. This next time when your hand comes down, frame your left foot and move your kind of toe heel towards the middle of the mat a little bit more. And straighten your back knee so you're in a low lunge. And draw your arms up into Anjaneyasana. And feel the difference from the side that opened and the side that didn't. And then we're just going to draw our front legs straight and draw our hips back and drop our arms. And let them go all the way behind you. And then draw them back forward, bend your knee, and back up into Anjaneyasana. And let yourself explore this movement a couple of times, drawing your arms back toward the wall behind you, down to the mat, bend your knee, and up into Anjaneyasana. Okay. And then bring your hands to frame your foot one more time. Lift your back knee off the mat. Turn your toes to face the long edge of your mat and stand up. Stand up into Utthita Parsvottanasana. And you've done a lot of work to get your chest to open up, and feel the results of that work and how easy it is for your chest to open up here. So just enjoy that opening for a minute. Press down through your feet to support your hips. And then once again, bring your hands down to frame your left foot. And this time, draw your left foot up and back into a three-legged dog. And take a minute to let that hip release by letting your foot fall to the outside and open up your hip. And maybe bring it back up into the a square three-legged dog, and then let it open again. And maybe this time it's able to open just a little bit further. And bring that left knee up between your hands for pigeon pose. And press down through your shins and your knees so that you can be upright in this pose so your hands can draw up to the ceiling. And then let your hands open out so that you can face the left side of your mat. So you're kind of in a twist. And then cartwheel your arms down so that you can fold over your left knee and relax for just a minute. Enjoy the breath and enjoy the heat in your hip from all of that work. Okay. And then since I don't have a cool transition, we'll go back to Parigasana with our right foot out. Sorry. So on our left, we'll be supporting ourselves with our left knee, with our right foot out toward the short edge of our mat. Keep your toes in line with your thigh bone. And we'll start those arm circles again as we pulse in our knee. So the knee will be varying degrees of bent. But really pull your arm up to the ceiling and behind you so that you can feel the opening in your chest as you do these circles. Okay. And then bring your hands to frame your right foot and toe heel so that you're more in the center of the mat. And straighten out your back leg to be parallel with your mat. And then round or draw your arms up toward the ceiling to get the stretch in the front of the left hip. And then we're going to start with those arm swooshes. So let your hands fall down to the mat and let your spine follow. And let them drop to the back of the room. And then reverse and come forward and reach up. Then reverse, let your hands come down and draw toward the back of the room. And then draw them toward the front of the room and up. And just enjoy the opening that you're getting here. Then bring your right arm to your right knee and press up through your back knee so it comes off the mat, and use your right arm to draw up and let your back foot fall open so that your toes are pointed toward the long edge of the mat, and enjoy this opening that you've worked to create in your chest. Be sure that you're pressing down through both feet to support your pelvis. And then let your hands drop to frame your right foot. Turn your back foot in and draw your right foot up to a three-legged dog. And then let your hip fall open. And square up your three-legged dog. And then let your hip fall open again. Then draw that right knee up between your hands to pigeon pose. Give yourself some time to adjust that back leg so that you can press through both of your legs and draw your arms up toward the ceiling. Be careful that you're not overbending and straining in your lower back. And then let your arms drop to the mat and fold over your right knee. Take a couple of breaths and let yourself relax and enjoy the opening in your hip. Okay.
Yay. Thank you, Amy. Um, Caro, any feedback from you before I jump in?
No, I'll let you go.
Okay. Um, so again, great job with the individual poses. I think you gave yourself the extra challenge of having poses with a lot of different setups. And so you did a really great job of cueing us in the transition of letting, the toes turn and the hips pivot. I felt really taken care of through all those transitions, and like it was very clear of where my body needed to be. So excellent job with that. Um, Again, like your previous sequence, I loved the variety of movement. You really took us through a huge array of exploration in the hips. So that was really awesome. It was fun to see how different your Parigasana was this time. It was like you had a different emphasis, and it's just really exciting to, like, the only way that you can teach Parigasana differently in two different sequences is if you've explored, and if you've felt something of like, oh, this is what I want to focus on here. So I just was excited to see that, and I really appreciated your different approach on in this sequence. Like it felt like a totally different Parigasana, and I highlight that because there's only 45 poses, but there are like infinite ways to approach each one. So it's like each class that you teach, even if it was like the same sequence, like could feel very different for your students. So just like planting the seed, giving yourself permission that maybe, for if you're teaching multiple classes a week, maybe you teach the same sequence a few times. It's going to come out different every time, even if you're only teaching once a week, maybe you teach the same sequence. So just knowing that it's like put the work in to make a sequence you love, and then you can teach it like infinite times. And you really showed that, Amy, of like the variety we can get in our approaches to each movement. I It's funny. There was one movement where I was like, oh, I don't know if my body loves this. And then you actually didn't teach it on the second side. Um, so I just want to take a moment to talk about the pigeon with the twisting open. Um, and
Oh,
I just wondered if, like, on the first side you were like, oh, this isn't exactly what I meant, or I just wanted to give you a chance to comment on that. And it's okay if that's exactly how you meant it. We should just talk about it.
no, I just forgot it on the second side. That's all.
Okay.
So, and when I did that, that upward pigeon has been an interesting thing for me to explore because I've never done that very much because it's almost always, you almost always are down in it.
Right.
Um, but it's interesting the strength that you can build as doing that upward one. So anyway, that doesn't
Yeah.
help. But
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to me that you feel the freedom to explore and try new things. So I don't want to be like, Amy, that was wrong. How dare you twist open and pigeon? So it's like, please, by all means, always explore and try things. And it's like certain things might feel great in your body, and then you might see like students struggling and maybe be like, oh, okay, how can I adapt that? Or like, oh, I might not teach it that way again. So it's not like a right or wrong thing. Maybe there's something that you discovered in your body that I like something that I'm noticing, and this could be different for you, is if I keep my hips square and I just play with my spine, it feels okay. It was something about like twisting my hips
mhm.
at the same time, maybe because it's kind of a compromised position.
Yeah.
So I think just explore it and see, like, almost find, like, what did I like about this? Was it, it sounded like you liked the strength of,
Mhm.
like, being able to move. And so maybe even something like a cue of, you don't have to go very far, but just explore, the support and strength you have that allows the spine to move or something. So
Okay.
that just was tricky in my body. And
Well, and watching you do it, like when I watched you do it, I could totally see that in your hip. but I didn't feel that same thing. So it's interesting to watch you do it. And so I can
Cool.
see that compromise now.
Um, yeah, I'm sort of biased here, but I really love twisting into the leg. There is something that we don't study in level one. It's kind of an advanced thing, but it's the lines of fascia in the body. And so there's a cross line of fascia that when we twist, we stretch that, and when we're in a back bend, it's like it really accentuates that twisting and opening. And so in pigeon, twisting into the leg is almost like this very rare opportunity that we don't get a lot. So maybe try that one and see if it feels like what you like about the support and the strength. But it's I think of pigeon as sort of like the hips are squaring and they're drawing together. And so twisting almost like helps me do that naturally, but like twisting the other way almost like takes me out of that.
Yeah,
So I don't know if that helps, but just a thought.
no, it does.
Um, I really loved the transition up to Virabhadrasana 2. I felt like that was um, so easeful, and it's tricky. You went from middle to standing, but you made it really clear and really simple, and or actually not Virabhadrasana 2, into extended side angle. I apologize. And then I loved from there how we went to three-legged dog, and you allowed us to open the hips. Um, a little seed I'll plant for, because you'll use these sequences that you've written in the class planning that we do from here on out. Um, you might notice, you're like, wow, I made my way all the way up to standing. Like, you might end up saying, like, okay, I kind of want to stay standing and do some stuff here. So I just want to give you that permission. And then towards like after you've done your standing stuff, then maybe you pick up the sequence and you go to that nice, um, you know, uh, and this is sort of like taking you down to the floor towards the end of class. So
Yeah.
you guys might end up breaking up some of the sequences you've written just to feel like you can explore the levels a little bit more. Or maybe from extended side angle, you end up going into the down dog and the hip opener. And I know you're like, oh, I didn't really plan how to do the second side, which wasn't in the assignment, so that's okay. But as long as we're looking at it, I thought just like dropping the knees and then turning could be a really nice way to just feel like, okay, now I'm ready to just do the second side. And you could do pigeon and come back to kneeling, or depending on how you're feeling, save the pigeon for later. So we've like broken the ice on sequencing, and then as you start to have more information, you might realize like, oh, okay, this works as two things, or I'm going to add some stuff in, take some stuff away, all that. All right. So how are you guys doing break-wise? I know we had just like a quick bathroom break around 9. Would now be a good time for like our 6-minute kind of one? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So I'll put that timer on the screen and we'll come back for a little bit more teaching.
And I am gonna leave. We're having trouble with the internet, so I will be back, but I'm actually gonna leave for a little bit.
Okay, and just let me know if you need more time to
Okay.
figure stuff out. We'll wait for you.
Okay. Thanks.
Hey, Caro, do you think after like seeing Amy's and like asking your questions, do you feel like you could look at your sequences and like, um, do you think there's things you would change? You know what I mean? Like, do you feel like you have a different perspective now than when you were doing them?
Um, yeah. Yeah, I kind of just want to like honestly make more.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would change. Well, maybe I would change, I guess, the ones that I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, you like, I mean, it would be up to you if you wanted to use those or let them be inspiration for something new. Um,
Yeah.
there was something I forgot to mention in Amy's sequence that was a really great example of how you can, you know, decide to stay in a movement a little bit longer and explore like um, shifting between two different postures. And so she had us, I don't remember exactly, but I know I loved this moment. I think it was like between Anjaneyasana and almost like a hurdler stretch. So this is a really great example. I've given a lot of like complicated examples, right, in Amy's first sequence of like, oh, here's little pockets that you can repeat. But maybe at first, you know, it's a little bit more practical or seems like more grounding for you to just focus on two, you know? And so I thought this was a really nice way to repeat something and spend some more time in a pose without it being overly complicated. Kind of like Caro, your Parvritajana Shirshasana, and then into the flash dance. You know, so when there's like a really easy, natural um, counter pose, sometimes it feels good to just take a little extra time to let people explore that before you move on. So thanks for the example of that, Amy. Um, so I want to see more of your sequences, but I want it to be as beneficial for as possible for you guys because you've already gotten some feedback. So I'm sure you're already like letting things change and evolve inside of you. So um, I'm wondering if it would be helpful to have like a short study hall where you could glance at the next sequence that you would like to teach and just like go through it in your body and just see if from the feedback you've gotten and this like new information, if there's anything in it that you would change before you teach it. Do you guys think that would be useful? If not, we don't have to do it. I just wanted to give you that possibility. Cool. So I don't know how long it will take, and I don't want you guys to feel rushed. So let's maybe try 10 minutes and just check in and see if anybody wants more time. And I'm here, so if you're like, hey, how does this look? Like, I want you to ask questions and have this be like an exploration time. So pick one of the flows that we haven't seen yet. Um, and it might be perfect as is, but just go through it and just notice if you have a new perspective now and take any notes that might help it be even better when you teach it. And I'll put a little timer up, not to rush you, but just so that you um, have a sense, and we'll just check in 15, 10 minutes, I think I said. I don't want to break up anyone's creative flow, but I just want to check in. Um, how is it going? Does anyone want more time? So out of curiosity, because you went through this process 6 times over the past week, and now you just played around a little bit for the past 10 minutes. Did anything feel different? Was that useful? Did you discover anything? Any questions?
Yeah, I feel like I changed what I had, and I'm kind of curious to try to teach it because I'm realizing how kind of like pliable these are, and so it's good to go through the full process. I feel like of changing them.
Yay, hooray. Well, after Amy shares any comments she has, you will get to teach what you just worked on. So your wish is my command.
Yay.
um, yeah, how about you, Amy?
I was just trying to make my steps a little bit smaller. Um, I think I get very focused on like pose and pose, and the middle part of that, like I need to find the middle part because there's a lot there that I I just it doesn't register. I need to pause in the middle.
It's
So
funny.
I don't know if I did that, but I made them a little smaller.
That's great. Yeah, it's so awesome that you have that awareness because you're right. It is usually like kind of this gray area that I feel like when a lot of teachers like go to teach a transition, there's almost like a lost opportunity because so much can happen almost in those awkward spaces, right? Where it's like not quite opposed, so we have to move like a little differently than our standard postures. Did you feel like as you explored you were able to have an aha moment of like, oh, I feel what's happening, or how is that going?
Well, no, I have not had an aha yet. Mostly I made I did smaller steps between poses. So the poses are more similar, but I feel like I don't know. We'll play here for a little bit and see what comes out.
That's great. That seems like you did have an aha moment of like just, oh, if I have smaller steps, it's clearer. So I think that's awesome. I can't wait to try it. Caro, did you have to, or did you want to add something to that? I think I saw your hand.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of Amy, because I feel like I since we both were in different places with our sequences of what we kind of highlighted on changing, mine changed in a different direction, and now I'm like, oh, you know what? I need to pay more attention because I went and just like made mine more variety, and I feel like I need to fine tune it. So I get you. I'm still waiting for that aha moment that I really want, but I think we're working hard to get there. So yeah.
Yeah, and I want you guys to, like, just a little reminder. This is your first time teaching sequences besides the warm up, right? We literally went from like pose, let's focus on poses to like, okay, here we're going to take a big step together, and so this is just day 1 of sequencing pretty much. And for the rest of the training, every day you're going to be teaching sequences you've written. Imagine how much you learned just by teaching a couple sequences, and we're going to just keep going through that over and over. So it's okay if you're like, it's not crystal clear yet. That's actually just kind of part of the process, and we're going to go through it, and it's going to get clearer and better every day. Um, so with that, I think we'll have time for each of you to teach one more sequence, preferably the one you just played with, which means it's a little unfamiliar, which means it might feel a little awkward, or it might feel like, oh, this this transition doesn't actually make sense when I try to teach it to someone else. So take the load off. Think of us as your guinea pigs, and if something is challenging, maybe we can help you smooth it out so that it doesn't feel like scary to debut it, but rather like, yay, I get help making this sequence perfect. Um, so just keeping to the order we had before, Caro, do you feel ready to debut?
Yeah, let's try it out.
Cool.
Let's try it on for size. Okay. So the one I just was working on is from kneeling. And Amy, you'll like that we are starting in Parigasana. So we're just going to step the left foot out into a comfortable spot for the hips to feel loose. And then we're just going to explore here, circling the arm. And you're going to circle the right arm, so reaching it first behind you, following with your gaze, and overhead, and then forwards and down. And noticing this movement from the ground up, feeling your entire right side of the body stretching as you open up. And then we're going to, the next time you come forwards, just plant your hand on the inside of that left foot and frame the foot with both hands. And then we're going to rock forwards and back as you rock back, lifting the hips and stepping your back foot in. So we're in humble warrior. And then just taking a couple breaths comfortably here and actually maybe settling in to the pose, adjusting your stance if you need to, maybe bringing your back foot in or stepping it to the side to have more space in the hips. And then we're going to transition into a revolved triangle, so opening your left hand up so that you are twisting through the spine and opening to the left. And then we're going to close the top part of this pose, so by bringing the top arm down towards the ground, kind of like the page of a book. And then opening it back up, drawing first with the elbow and allowing the elbow to pull your wrist, and then finally opening the page back up through your hand and your fingertips, and then slowly closing. So noticing how this rotation changes the angle of your spine, allow your back heel to be loose, and explore this opening and closing on your own, just for a moment. And then next time you close, we're going to actually plant your back foot by dropping the heel down and lifting through your right arm up into warrior two. So breathing here through the spine, lifting through the crown of your head, and then finding a micro bend in the back knee so that you can settle the hips. We're going to, kind of like the pages of the book again, close the back arm over the front and then pull it back like you're drawing the arrow of an arch all the way open. And then exploring this, allowing your spine to twist, and then open and release. And then from here, we're going to open back up, reaching through both fingertips. Send your front toes forward and bend your knees and send your hips back into goddess. We're going to reach up, and then as you draw the elbows back, incorporate a lion's breath. Sticking out the tongue and finding a small back bend. Both eyes look towards your forehead as you breathe. Really get into it and don't be afraid to make noise. Okay, that's the end of my mini flow.
Great. Will you teach the second side too?
Oh yeah. Yay, we get to do this. So after our beautiful lion's breath, we are just going to straighten the legs and release back down into, now we're in a wide stance. And then you can shift the toes towards the top of the mat and bend the knees so that you can comfortably come into Parigasana on the opposite side. So we're just going to once again gently explore circling the arm. So reaching behind you, following with the gaze, and coming up overhead as you bend the knee and come down. And allowing your natural breath to guide the movement, no rush, just enjoying each part of the whole. And then as you circle the arm forwards, just planting the hand down and framing the front foot, maybe walking it in a little bit so that you can flip the back toes under and send the hips up into humble warrior. And you can adjust your feet so that you're able to evenly distribute your weight and find comfort in this pose for a moment. So just allowing the movements to settle and feeling the depth of this pose, using your breath as your guide. We're going to open up once again to revolve triangle. So lifting your right hand up and opening up through the side. Once again, we're going to explore with this twist by closing, bringing the top down, arm down and back. So exploring with your breath in your own body, unfurling through your spine with each little movement. Maybe feeling that on the outside of those sensations on the outside of your leg, through your hip, exploring from your toes all the way up to your fingertips. And the next time that you come down, you're going to close the book, plant your right hand on the inside of your right foot, and lift up into warrior two. Then bringing your back arm forwards, closing, bringing your palms together, and then drawing like the bow, an arrow back. And then exploring here once again at your own pace. And then once we close the book coming forwards, we're going to draw back as we lift the right toes and plant them, bending the elbows and the knees, sitting the seat back into goddess. Once again, exploring with lion's breath, reaching up, releasing as you exhale, feeling your power and your strength in your center. Awesome. Okay, and that's the second side.
Thank you so much, Kara. Wow, I can't believe you just made that sequence. Pretty amazing. You had 10 minutes to make that sequence, and it took you 10 minutes to teach it. So it just seems pretty remarkable that you were able to accomplish all of that. Amy, any comments for Kara before I share? Oh, you're muted.
So that last time that you did the lion's breath thing, like I felt like you found your groove, and like each time you added a little bit more to it. It was kind of cool. Also with the revolved triangle going in and out of it, I really noticed when you were doing that, like the benefit. There's so much benefit in going in and out of a pose. Because you can go a little bit deeper every time instead of sitting there cranking at it. It just naturally opens up. So like that was an awesome little part of your sequence. Thank you for teaching that to me.
Thank you. Thanks for your feedback.
Thanks, Amy. I'm so excited to hear that because it's like we can tell you to like move in poses, but until like you feel what you just felt of the benefits, it might even be like annoying. It might be almost like distracting or agitating to the mind. And so it's really exciting and wonderful when you can start to feel how the movement is beneficial physically, and then it becomes more soothing mentally. And so, yay! That's great. Well, great job, Caro. I thought it was just such an exciting sequence. We really covered a lot of ground, and you had so many great transitions and movements, and even little details. Like I loved how in Revolve Triangle you cued to like lead with the elbow. Like that just was so different from reaching out with a straight arm. It was almost like reverse melting in a way. You know how like melting down just allows everything to release? I felt like it was like I was like melting up. So I thought that was awesome. And then how you brought it into Virabhadrasana too. I just really liked those details that allowed the exploration to feel really special. One thing that I think is going to make teaching easier, and we haven't really talked about this, it's good to orient yourself towards one side of a mat, and you can change where you're pointed, but sometimes like if you're like askew, it can start to feel like really ambiguous where people aren't sure where to be. And once in a while, like there's a pose, like I've done like from goddess, like how the feet are turned out. I've done something where it's like maybe we come into tree and we are askew, right? Because we're not pointed towards a specific edge of the mat. So I do make exceptions to this once in a while. But when you're newer at these kind of complex sequences, right, where you're changing direction and you're changing levels, I might recommend trying to be clear of like, okay, are we facing long edge of the mat or are we facing short edge of the mat? And I'll show you the example. In Parigasana, I think you do a modification, which is great. We should all modify so that we feel comfortable, where your foot is slightly ahead of your knee. It's almost like a combination of Anjaneyasana and Parigasana because the foot's just a little forward. I think it feels really good. Nothing's wrong with it. When we did that and then we came into the lunge, we were in this off-kilter position, right, where I'm not quite at the short edge, I'm not quite at the long edge, I'm like pointed this way. So then, yeah, Humble Warrior, we're not even like looking, it doesn't matter. But then when we come up to Vera 2, we're sort of off at an angle, and it can just make it challenging for people to be clear in their bodies when they're not exactly sure which way to be pointed. So I think if you set up towards, the back edge of the mat and had the foot in line, and then if it's more comfortable to have the foot forward, just like walk the foot back as you set down so that you're actually pointed like towards the short edge of the mat. Then that way, when you come up to Virabhadrasana 2, you'll be open to the long edge. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I think I just, yeah, like having more mat awareness is what I need. And it does thanks for like walking through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tricky because at the same time, I'm telling you guys, do whatever you want and change directions and do all these wild things. But it's almost like having like certain things really clear helps you have more freedom without people getting confused.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
great job. I really enjoyed doing Humble Warrior into Parvrtta Trikonasana. I thought that was just felt so good, and I found myself really like playing with extending my leg as I lifted up, because in Humble Warrior, like the knee is bent, and either is fine, but it definitely felt really good to allow the leg to extend if people feel warm enough for that. And maybe you were doing that already, but I didn't hear you cue it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does. I'm actually curious, like what I was doing because that looks like it feels really good. And I think,
So yeah, as that top arm lifts, just allowing that right leg to kick a little bit.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I was feeling that, and
Oh, cool.
I just, yeah, I didn't cue that. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought doing Virabhadrasana 2 after that felt really nice, right? Because it's like that is really elongating from the like hip all the way up into the side core, and then Virabhadrasana 2 almost like ties all of that back together. So it just felt really balancing. And then Goddess was kind of like an icing on the cake moment. Sometimes before going over to the second side, it can feel really good to have a symmetrical pose, right? Almost like a moment where like everything is like anchored in and tied back together, and then we switch sides. So I just thought that felt great. Um, Yeah, excellent work. I feel like the sky's the limit now that like you've just shifted your like goals as you sequence
Yeah,
these. Like, yeah, if you did that in 10 minutes, I think you're golden.
thank you. Thanks for all of your like help and kind of evolving through this process.
Yeah, that's like literally what I'm here for. um, Amy, any questions before you teach?
Nope.
All right. Take your time, but whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay. We're going to start in table, facing the left side of your mat. And then we're going to drop our elbows so that our forearms are on the mat. And if it's comfortable, you can bring your fingers together so that they make kind of your forefingers and your thumbs make a triangle in front of you. And before we go up into dolphin, I want you to play with your shoulders just a little bit. Shrug your shoulders up to your ears, and then draw your shoulder blades down your back. And do that a couple of times and feel the muscles in your back that draw your shoulder blades down and out a little bit. And it should light up underneath your armpits just a little bit. And when you find that good solid drawing back of your shoulder blades, add to that a press through your hands and feel how that really lights up your back. Use that strength in your back to press into your toes and lift your hips. Bring your knees off the mat. Keep your back fired up by pressing through your hands. And if you feel that you've got the strength and you want to experiment, you can bring your chin towards the front of your fingers and then press back. And keep pressing through your hands so that your back is doing a lot of this work. Okay. And the next time you draw your hips back, just hold the pose for a minute. Let your head drop and let yourself feel the heat in your back. Okay. Drop your knees to the mat and roll your spine up to kneeling. And bring your arms, just let them start to flow up. Alternate these arm circles toward the back of the room so that it almost just draws you into a back bend. And you can lean back as far as feels good. And then if your right hand can reach your right heel, just let it rest there for a minute and bring your left arm up and stretch through the left side. Then drop your left hand and let your left hand find your left heel and do the same thing with your right hand. Then drop your hand and come back up to kneeling. And if it feels available, you can reach both hands back to your heels into camel pose. Make sure that you're finding length through the front of your body and that your core is supporting everything. And then release and come back up to kneeling. Drop your thumb to your heels and come down into Balasana. Rest your hands toward your heels and let your whole backside relax and melt toward the mat. Enjoy your breath here. Then reach your hands forward towards the front of your mat and come onto your stomach. Put your forehead on the mat and stretch your arms out in front of you. Slide your hands along the floor and along the mat until they reach your shoulders, about where your shoulders are. Feel the strength in your back and slowly start to rise. Bring your head and your chest off the mat, drawing them forward and supporting your back the whole time with your core. And then let that float back down to the mat. Take a breath. Then press into the mat. Roll your shoulders back and bring your chest forward again. Enjoy the strength of your core, that it can support your back through all of this, and the flexibility of your back, that it can bend in such a magnificent way. And then, Then press through your hands and lift your hips up off the mat into plank. And start to do some plank walks. So raise your right hand to your left shoulder and put it back on the mat. Raise your left hand to your left shoulder and put it back on the mat. And try to keep your hips as stable as possible as you go back and forth. picking your hands up off the mat. Do that one more time, and then bring both hands to the mat, press down, and lift your hips up toward the back into downward dog. Press through the outside of your hand and find the arch in your hand and feel those muscles in your back that supported you in dolphin, doing the same thing with down dog. Let your breath return to normal, and then bring your knees down, okay?
All right, thank you, Amy. Wonderful sequence. Um, Caro, any comments before I dive in?
Yeah, I just thought it was so like refined, and I loved the contrast like to the other ones, but they were all amazing. It's like you knew what I needed. Like I loved your cues for the back and how you kind of like kept that going through the flow. I just thought it was amazing. So yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Caro. Yeah, great job, Amy. Wow, like my arms and my shoulders and like my core and back just like feel so alive right now. um, I really appreciated the time that you took in the beginning to help us understand the shoulders and like establish sensation there. And it was really cool how first like we were like shrugging and then adding in the hands. I felt like you went layer by layer. So it's really clear and really accessible even for someone who maybe like had never felt that before. So it almost had like a workshop sort of quality where I really felt like I was being guided really deeply to understand more in my body. Um, and that felt really great leading up into dolphin. Um, and I loved Ostrasana. I just felt like after, all that shoulder work and my core was firing, it was a really cool way to use that strength to open. So I still felt really strong, but it was almost like a relief in a way because my shoulders were free, but they were still working. So it was just, that was like a really great counterpose. I felt like it was exactly what my body wanted and exactly what my body needed. Um, and then we went into some more fun shoulder work and ended with the down dog. It was quite a challenging sequence, like in a good way. So, maybe people wouldn't want to repeat it. I don't know. But I felt like it was repeatable. Like I felt like we ended in down dog. And I really could have seen us, dropping the knees, dropping the hands, pressing back to dolphin. I might skip a pose here and not remember it all perfectly. And then having that moment of, I just thought perfection of opening up and getting all of that relief and enjoying that. And then making our way back down and doing a little bit more. And, sometimes if you did choose to repeat it, maybe in the first round, it's like all that stuff to wake up the arms, and maybe it's just like a baby dolphin. We just hover the knees, or it's dolphin, but we don't do any dolphin push-ups, right? It's like just one aspect of what you taught. And then when you come back around, there's like an option to add a little bit more if it seems like the class wants it. And like same thing, doing dolphin, doing down dog, doing shoulder taps, that definitely seems like it could be a lot to repeat it all over again. But maybe there's ways in the first round, like you tame it a little, so then in the second round you feel like, yeah, we still have like that power. So maybe it's like shoulder taps with the knees down, just to almost get that wiring, so that in the next round they feel more ready to do it with the knees up. I think it was such a well-balanced sequence that even though it was challenging, I felt like really great after. So it's just like when you find a sequence that really works, you give yourself permission to repeat it, because it's finding it that's the hard part. And then each time we repeat it, we might discover like, oh, I feel that muscle she was talking about. Like I feel it firing up a little bit more. Or like, oh, I can, the first round of camel is maybe like this, and then you give the option to drop one or both hands, so it can feel kind of exciting to like do another round and add something, and maybe even do another round and add something else. So great job. Any questions? I know that we haven't had time to look at all of your sequences. From the feedback that you've gotten, do you feel like pretty good and pretty clear, even though you haven't gotten feedback on a couple more of the ones that you wrote? Okay. Does anybody want to, like you were like, I was working on something and I was just wondering if this transition is okay, because we could definitely take questions like that. And there will be time tomorrow to teach more, but I just want to give you a chance before we move on. Okay, class planning. So there are probably as many ways to plan a class as there are yoga teachers. um, so this is not like, here is the way that you have to plan a class, right? But imagine if I just was like, okay guys, your homework tonight's to write a class, and tomorrow we'll talk about it, see ya. It might be like, oh my gosh, where do I begin, right? So the theme of the training is sort of like just take one more step, right? One more step. So you guys are now experts at Shakti flows. You've proven yourself. And so we're going to just take one more step and talk about how to put them together and how that forms a class. Eventually, you might find a way that works way better for you. Okay? So I don't want this to feel limiting at all, but rather just like, okay, I can use all of my experience and knowledge that I have right now, and here's the easiest way to write a class. And then, you'll grow and evolve, and you'll have your own way. Any preliminary questions about anything I've said? Okay. So you've got your 6 Shakti flows, maybe even more. Maybe you just wrote a 7th one. So how can we use them? The simplest way is to literally just say, okay, I'm going to do my Shakti flow from the floor, right? The floor ones might just be a little more accessible. You can move a little slower because you might not be holding as challenging of poses. So it's like, do it on the left, do it on the right, and then we're ready for something a little more challenging. Maybe your middle sequence doesn't feel very challenging, in which case, this is just like guidelines, right? But it's a great rule of thumb, a great place to start of like, okay, so now I did some stuff on the floor. I'm trying to think of one of your, like, Caro's first thing that was, or no, maybe her second thing, where we started and we had some, seated things and some things close to the earth, just exploring the hips and such. And then after that, it's like, oh, okay, I can rise up to kneeling, and I can do a sequence from here. Amy just taught a really great middle sort of sequence, right? So maybe you teach that on, hers actually was only one side, so you teach that middle sequence, and then maybe you're like, okay, I'm ready to come to standing, right? So then you've got a standing Shakti flow that you can repeat on both sides, and that's sort of like the basic framework of a class. We're going to go into all of this in more detail, but does that make sense as just like a pretty clear approach, just almost like climbing a mountain, just working your way up? Again, no rules. Maybe you're like, my floor sequence was really, really hard, and I wouldn't want to do that first. My middle sequence was really easy, and so it's just like a rough outline. And you've already written a warm-up, right? You've written a warm-up that started with interoception, which we know can really take a lot of time. The classes that I've taught, especially the Wednesday class when we have a little bit more time, sometimes interoception is like 10 minutes, right? So you've got a sizable chunk of your class already written, the interoception and then the warm-up. And then you've got different levels of Shakti flows, and then eventually there will be a cool down at the end, which we'll talk about next week. So that's the rough outline of a class. It's nothing new. It's nothing scary. It's basically what you did for homework, but now like putting those blocks together, right? It's like now you have these building blocks and you can build something with them. Here's just another way of looking at it. So same information as the previous slide, but you've got interoception and a warm-up, flow 1, flow 2, flow 3. Maybe they're shorter, right? Like how Kara was like, oh, is it okay that my sequences were, symmetrical and they were shorter? Sure, it just might mean you need to do more, right? Like Amy's last sequence, it was there were no single-sided poses, so she wouldn't have to repeat it unless she wanted to, which is absolutely fine. You can repeat it several times if that feels good, or you can say, no, like I'll just add on another sequence, right? So don't feel like I'm only allowed 3 flows, right? That's just sort of like a great place to start. You've got something on the floor, you've got something in the middle, you've got something standing. And then cool down, pranayama, and shavasana, and that's our whole class. So we are going to dive into each of the sections a little deeper, but I just want to see if there's any questions about that overall format. Great. So let's look at the first part. And this is review because we've kind of been talking about this as you guys have been teaching. You have your interoception, your warm-up. You're already pros at that. You've already taught it and done an excellent job. And then we move into your first Shakti flow, which might be one on the floor, right? It might not be, but that's a great place to start at first. And if it's a two-sided thing, you repeat it on one side, and then you repeat it on the second side. After you've repeated both sides, you may need to transition, right? You guys did explore multiple levels, right? Like a lot of times you might have had a sequence that started somewhere and ended somewhere else. So maybe your transition's already there, right? Maybe you're like, oh, I'm already, the sequence ended kneeling, right? And so now I'm ready to just begin a kneeling sequence. But if it didn't, right? Like, let's say Amy's nice sequence that ended with like happy baby, one of the first ones she taught, and maybe that was like her vinyasa or her first Shakti flow, then she might have to figure out like, oh, okay, how am I going to transition to the next vinyasa here, right? And so like we talked about, she could come up through the center and then maybe she just shifts over and she's like, okay, now I'm kneeling and the next vinyasa starts. Sort of a weird example because that vinyasa definitely was like a middle vinyasa too, but you get the point. You might have to add something in, right, to help make that transition. You might have to cut something out, right? Maybe your sequence, like Amy, that sequence, I feel like we did do kneeling stuff, and so maybe you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to cut out the rolling down to the back because it's just easier to stay up. Right? And I'm not suggesting that because I loved that sequence. But, as you start to see the big picture, certain things might not make sense anymore, right? And that's okay. You'll use that another time. And then if it is two-sided, you definitely repeat the second side. And then the final one is, you transition to standing if you're not already there. You teach your standing level Shakti flow, and then you repeat it on the second side. So, it's very possible with what you've written that you already pretty much have a class, right? You have all these Shakti flows. They might work together, they might not. That will be up to you to discover. Um, Something that this to me is the most fun part. So if it hasn't been fun yet, yay, here it comes. So what I think is really fun and exciting about using these Shakti flows in a class is that you have so many options, right? Things that we've started to talk about, like, do you want to start to pulse within that Shakti flow? Right? Do you want to repeat it a few times? Like they're a little more familiar, so each time, like Amy said, they might get a little deeper, or they might be able to relax a little because you know that feeling when you don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes it's like, oh, what's next? But let's say you've gone through a few poses and the teacher says, okay, we're going to spend the next few minutes repeating that. Imagine, the mind is just like, okay, I know exactly what to expect, right? So it's actually really soothing for the nervous system, and it gives the body a chance to improve. Let me give you an example of that. Carol, you did a really nice job in that reverse table where you said, okay, like set everything down, let the hands adjust, right? And now try it again. And so sometimes on the first round, it's a little awkward. Our body hasn't quite figured out how to support us, right? But the teacher gives us an opportunity to try it again, and then there might be like a little light bulb of like, oh, okay, now my shoulders do feel more supported, right? Oh, now I can lift my hips a little bit more. Oh, now I understand that cue that she gave that hadn't quite uh, sunk in yet. So hopefully by now you're, starting to get on board with the benefits of repeating stuff. Repeating stuff can often be the most fun when you give people permission to slow down, right? When you give them permission to not go into their end range of motion, where it's almost like playing in that space where you feel very supported, right? And so then it's a lot more sustainable than if they've maxed out. They're not gonna want to do it again, right? So as you write your classes, um, you can actually start to repeat stuff, and feel like, okay, do I want to repeat the whole thing? How many times do I want to repeat it, right? Is there anything that I want to cut out so that it's smoother? After repeating it a few times, do I need a counter pose, right? That wasn't initially in there, but because now I'm repeating it, my body needs a little break or relief. So repeating it is going to help your class evolve and just become more interesting and more balancing. So I want to give an example of when you might add in like a counter pose between repetitions or between sides. So for example, maybe you had a sequence that was like a standing sequence and you did a few different things standing, and then you're like, oh, okay, I want to do that again, flowing through those movements. And we're going to do it one more time. And I know I'm doing it a little different every time because I'm just making it up. And so maybe after doing all that, you're like, oh, wow, that was a lot of hip opening. Before I do the second side, maybe I want to give people a little break. And I even want them to like be able to close their feet for a moment just to give the hips, a moment to breathe. And then we'll step back out and we'll do it from the second side, right? So maybe that wasn't necessary when you first wrote the sequence, but adding in this element of repeating, or now knowing that you go right into repeating the other side, you start to feel like, oh, I need a counter pose, right? So any questions about things you might add in or subtract as you put these flows together? Cool. Great. So I hope that it feels pretty intuitive and like it's just one more step from where you are right now. But we're introducing this early, like today, so that tomorrow we can talk about like how it went and check in and see if there's questions. So my goal for the rest of this time until we meditate is to actually allow you to start to play with this while I'm here so that it feels really clear and you're not just, before class tomorrow trying to work on this and having a bunch of questions. So your homework tonight will be to at least start the process of putting together a class. You might not finish completely, and that's okay. Ideally, you're using the things you've written, so it more feels like compiling, and less like starting from scratch. But we have a pretty generous amount of time right now. So my hope is that you can do some personal practice with the vinyasas you've written, start to explore repeating them, getting a sense for that, adding in counter poses, and then transitioning to the next one. Any questions? Okay, great. So this time is for you to start writing your first yoga class. And I am here. I'll be here. So just let me know if you need anything as you play. Hey, do you have a question?
Oh no, I was just seeing if my computer was on mute or not. I
Um,
was talking to Finley.
well, as long as we've paused for a moment, how is it going? And I
Um,
don't want to interrupt you, Amy, if you're in your flow, you don't have to come.
yeah, it's good. I don't have anything really, any questions.
Have you felt like you um, have a sense of like wanting to repeat things before moving on?
Yes, I do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is that feeling, and Amy, you just nodded. Do you feel like when you go to repeat it, you know what to do?
Well, what I'm finding is that as I go to repeat it, I'm realizing, oh, I would like to do a little bit different variation of this the first time. And then the second time, get, like you say, build on it as you go from sequence to sequence. And so it's interesting how my brain has shifted a little bit. So,
Wow. Usually takes us a while to shift our brains, so good job.
well, maybe it hasn't shifted that much, but
Great. Well, keep on going, and then we'll have a little bit of time for some guided shavasana together, and then we'll take a break and meditate. So maybe we can take like, let's see, 10 minutes. Take another 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have some shavasana time.
Abaya.
Yes.
So I am playing with, I have adjusted that first flow that I did with broad Vajrasana and Parigasana and stuff. And then, but that's like a mid-level flow, right? So, or is that like a gentle enough that even though it's not on the floor, it's gentle enough at a mid-level that like I could do that gentle mid-level and then go into that shoulder one that I did. They're both kind of mid-level, but the dolphin one is much more rigorous. It's a
Yeah.
very different feel.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like because you're doing a warm up first,
Mm-hmm.
that sequence with Barad and Parigasana is probably quite accessible. So I that sounds fine to me. And then as you continue to sequence, you start your next class from the beginning, like without like trying to use what you've written.
Right.
It might evolve differently, but I think that sounds great, especially because we do come onto the back. There's a little bit of rolling and like soothing things. So
Mm-hmm.
that seems like totally doable.
Okay. I
Yeah.
just, anyway.
Yeah. And as long as I'm thinking of it, because you guys are doing your personal practice every day, the vision is, you're writing a class right now. Tomorrow, do this as your personal practice. And
Right.
it's going to go faster, right? Like when you teach it to a class, it might be an hour to an hour and a half. When you do it in your own body, it might be 20 to 30 minutes or a little longer depending. And then you'll know the answer. You'll be like, oh yeah, that was perfect. Or, oh, I'm going to leave out this one pose. That felt like a little too soon, but the rest of the poses in that sequence felt like perfect as
Okay.
my first flow.
Okay. Because the ones that I did like on my belly, like those are harder flows. They're more, um, they require just more strength. It's more like I feel like doing Cobra right, and maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I feel like Cobra requires a lot um, of strength. And
Yeah, yeah, my approach, because I do often do cobras early on, is like I'm sort of thinking of like trying to like wake all of that up
mhm,
because I want people to be able to use them in Parigasana, in your
mhm,
kneeling flow. So I wouldn't be like, not that you're afraid. It's okay if it's not going to be like their most optimum Bhujangasana. Like it's almost like, oh, okay, if I do this in the beginning, it's more of like a warming and patterning thing. If I do it
okay,
towards the end, it's more of like a peak experience where they can use all of the core work from the whole class to get a lot higher. But Cobra is something that wouldn't be unsafe, right? They just might not get up very high. So it could even be like, oh, let's start with your belly sequence. Um, do your middle sequence with Bharad Vajrasana and Parigasana, and then maybe come back to the belly and see if like, oh, now does it feel stronger? I mean, just an idea.
okay,
It's not like that would be a template, but it's okay if whatever comes at the beginning of class is is gentler, and then maybe you use that same flow in another class and it comes later and it's a totally different experience.
okay. And then this is not with what I'm doing. It's just, I'm just curious
Yeah.
because doing your classes and stuff, like you do not do any of the traditional vinyasa, down dog, cobra, that thing. Um, oh, sun salutations. Sorry, it's more
Yeah.
what I'm. Is there a reason for that? I'm sure there is. I'm just wondering what your
Um,
mindset is with that.
so they're basically my equivalent of that is going from child's pose to glorified cow or down dog and waving.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. do that whole sun salutation thing because I feel like every teacher does that 100 times in class, and like um, when I'm playing on my mat, I'm kind of like in this creative space where once in a while something might manifest similarly, where it's like, oh yeah, we're here, and I do want to step forward and stand up. So it's not like I'm like morally opposed to sun salutations. I actually once had it's called a sankalpa. It's like a practice that you've devoted yourself to doing every day. And sometimes people will ask like Babaji for a sankalpa. That's like in addition to like the normal morning and evening meditation, so it's like extra. And he told me to do 108,000 sun salutations, which I did. So I've done a lot of sun salutations. Um, and um, I guess my one, like, I guess critique of them is it's a lot of just like forward and back and not like exploring other dimensions that I find more interesting. So I think I'm just sort of bored of them. Like, in all honesty, I've literally done 108,000. And if you love them, by all means, they're not off limits, but a lot of teachers default to the sun salutation. I used to before I got into this more like exploratory style, and it was like every class was like it was just a matter of how many we were going to do, and I would add things in and make them more interesting. But um, um, our approach to movement is like the body benefits from having new pathways. So the sun salutation is really beneficial. But after you've done it many times, it's like you've sort of mastered it, right? Like your body understands that pattern and it can do it. And so I think it's really beneficial, to be like, oh, okay, now I'm going to start to explore a different pattern. And maybe you've seen in the past few weeks, like how certain things will repeat in a yoga class. And it's almost like I'm trying to help people figure out that pattern in their body, and then we'll move on and we'll have a totally new sequence, and that will repeat for a little while. So that's kind of my personal take. And so if you love sun salutations, you can definitely incorporate them. They often become a crutch, I feel like, where teachers like, okay, I'm going to teach sun salutations, and I'm going to add in a lunge on the first one, and then on the second one I'm going to add in a lunge and a twist, and then on the third one I'm going to do a lunge and a twist into Parvata Trikonasana, and my whole class is sequenced. So I just encourage you to keep exploring, but nothing is off limits.
Well, it's just as I have, like, I found when I was writing these, like one thing I would almost like default, my body would almost default to a sun salutation. Um, because they are easy and I've done so many of them, and it does, I mean, I still think they feel good. And so anyway, I just was curious.
Yeah, if they work for you, like do them and enjoy them. I do, the transition that I showed, I am pretty partial to that way, just in terms of like getting to explore more movement of the spine and integrate more support in the shoulders. But
Well, I think the way you do it wakes up your core more too. So anyway,
Yay.
thank you for the discussion.
Yeah, I guess I had a lot to say about sun salutation. Um, cool. Well, that's perfect. Do you feel like you guys are at a good pause point for your class? Um, and so uh, I think a good goal would be for homework to wrap up your class. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but to just sort of feel like, okay, here's what it looks like. And then tomorrow for your personal practice, try to go through it and One recommendation is to not stop a whole lot to take notes, though you don't want to forget stuff. So what I will often do is, let's say you're discovering, you're going through your first flow and you're like, "Ooh, that's really good." Okay, so before you take a note, do it on the second side with your new thing. And then after you finish both sides and you have a clear view of like, okay, we repeated this part a few times. I really liked that. I added this in. Take your notes and then move on to the next one. So you don't lose that sense of momentum and flow. So pause between flows to take notes, but not within them, you know. And if you're like, but what if I forget? My I'm like, I go through that too, and I'm like, if it's good, I'm not going to forget. If I forget, then maybe I didn't need that anyway. So just a tip, and you'll have some time to practice teach tomorrow and talk about it and all that. So any questions before we relax? Yay. So take a moment to head back to your mat. And before we take Shavasana, I want you to just explore your body a little bit. So you can recline and you have the option to bend the knees, place the soles of the feet on the ground, just can unload the low back a little bit. And just notice any sense of awareness inside the body. Maybe being here, you notice the sensation of the soles of the feet on the mat. Or maybe you can even feel your whole body taking up space. And just notice any areas that feel particularly alive and awake and energized. And then just introduce just some really gentle movement, perhaps windshield wipering the knees or snow angeling the arms. Really anything that helps you feel the body in a very smooth, therapeutic way. And imagine you're moving towards stillness, right? You're letting things be really slow, really easeful. Imagine just ungripping any tension in the body. Sometimes we have our favorite muscles that just end up doing extra work. That's okay, but just notice if there's a tight hip flexor or tight muscle in the neck. And see if you can ever so gently massage out any sense of tension anywhere in the body. You're welcome to explore a gentle twisting variation, a gentle back bend, like bridge pose, or a gentle forward fold, like happy baby, or apanasana, when you hug knees and chest. And eventually, the legs can extend, but you don't need to rush there. And just be aware of this process, right? This process of unwinding and allowing the body to come to a supported stillness. Just notice the little things that you enjoy so that you can cue someone else to enjoy them in the future. And this process can go on for as long as you're enjoying it. You're also welcome to find stillness at any point. So try to feel that sense of, do I want to keep moving? Am I ready to soften completely? And then from stillness, just make sure the neck has space. Can be helpful to walk shoulder blades down a little bit. Extend the feet away from you slightly as if um, extending the thigh out of the hip socket. Make sure the pelvis and the spine feel supported. It's okay that the low back arches naturally away from the floor. Just make sure there's no compression in the vertebra there. And then from stillness, just notice the breath. And imagine the breath massaging the body from the inside without you having to move anymore. You can keep awareness on the breath, or you can relax completely and just let yourself be supported from the inside out via your breath, your practice, and the pure consciousness that is at your foundation. We'll rest like this for several minutes. take your time reversing the process of that you just went through, gently bringing movement and awareness back into the body. And just try to notice the steps that you go through, how you like to wake back up. And if you feel like you discovered anything in your cool down or in your wake up that you want to remember, feel free to jot down a couple of notes about that process. And then we'll just take a little break before meditation. So we just have a couple of minutes, but do whatever you need to do. And when you're both back, we will meditate. As you begin the process of finding a comfortable seat, give yourself the extra opportunity to shift the body weight slightly from side to side, just allowing the hips to adjust so there's no tension in the hip sockets and no twisting in the knees. Make any adjustments to your cushion that allow you to be equally balanced. Kind of like the process of finding our way into Shavasana, um, give yourself the opportunity to just make gentle movements, allowing the spine to be supple, the shoulders, neck, and jaw to be relaxed. And the trajectory is towards stillness, but give yourself the freedom to explore on your way. As you achieve your still seat, notice how you can become more aware of what lies beyond the physical body. Maybe I should say lies within. So maybe you're able to feel the breath. Notice a sense of the mind being able to become quiet as the focus rests inside. We'll be working with the breath and the Hamsa mantra. And we'll begin by ever so gently slowing down the breath. And ideally, we'll not create any tension or anything unnatural. We'll just be able to rest a moment longer in each part of the breath. The inhale, and the space, and the exhale, and the space. And notice how slowing the breath has perhaps given you the opportunity to feel more subtle sensations within the breath. Notice any shifts in the mind. Sometimes it's easier for the mind to quiet, or easier to release the thoughts. and come back to the breath as it slows down. And just notice how natural the breath is, coming in and going out. You can just let that process unfold naturally. And as we prepare to add in the mantra, imagine the mantra being just as natural as the breath. So you don't have to do anything new. As you notice the inhale, just imagine the syllable hum coming in with the breath. Hum. And same thing with the syllable sa on the exhale. Imagine them just fused to the breath. And so each conscious observation of the in-breath allows you to harmonize with hum. And each conscious observation of the out-breath allows you to harmonize with sa, just effortlessly and naturally. Hamsa means I am that, referring to pure consciousness in this space of non-dualism that we talked about earlier. And so each time you harmonize with that mantra, imagine you're able to get a little closer to the that, the supreme inner consciousness. And just see if anything you're holding on to, any concern in the mind, any emotion, any tightness. See if you can just let those things soften and peel away, letting each breath help your true nature emerge. breath and the mantra guide you to connect with the space of pure consciousness inside. You're welcome to add a visualization with the same practice. You can just visualize a radiant, glowing sun at the heart. There's something so sparkling and luminous and bright. And imagine every conscious breath, that radiance is able to expand, and anything shielding it can just dissolve. So that your true nature can glow and shine brighter with every single breath. For the last few minutes of meditation, if you continue with the same practice, just notice if you can relax into the breath and the mantra, and notice any sense of releasing whatever obscures the emergence of this pure consciousness. You don't have to force anything or do anything. More an allowing, a softening, so that your natural state can emerge. For the last minute of meditation, just gently allow the mantra to soften. Allow the effort you've been applying to your practice to soften. And just let yourself rest in this space of perfect balance that you've cultivated. Namaste. Thank you for all of your teaching today. It was wonderful to be guided by each of you. Good luck working on your classes, and we will meet tomorrow. I can stick around if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, see you tomorrow.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thanks for the meditation. It just it really kind of helped sealed things in, you know? And the
Yay.
Shavasana, I think both were very needed. So thanks.
Absolutely. I'm so glad. I know so much of like the work that you've been doing in both trainings has been like allowing yourself to like relax and soften, and I'm glad that you can see uh, how truly beneficial like Shavasana is. You know, it's almost like all of the effort can like become clear in the body, and like all those pathways can like be like, oh, okay, great, I get this, you know. So it's not just like, okay, now take a nap. It's where the magic happens.
Truly.
Yay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you had that experience.
Yeah, me too. Oh, and then I wanted to just check that the sit is at the same time with Baba.
So, yes, because you changed your clocks, right? Or
Okay. Yeah, it's 5:30 here.
okay, yeah, and so it'll be from, wait, let me think for a second. It's in 3 hours. So it'll be 8:30 to 10:30 your time.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what it usually is.
Yeah. I think it's just the Hawaii things that change, but the things that are for like all of the Sangha, because everybody else goes through the time change. So um, our class is different, but all the Sangha programs are at the same time, if that makes any sense.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yes. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great to see you. And I will see you again tonight and tomorrow. And
Sounds
maybe in our dreams also.
Yeah, I hope so.
Me too.